One of the positive or exciting things that did occur during this pandemic is it really spiked an interest in buying local. Consumers, started to scramble as some of these essential products started vanishing off the supermarket shelves. And so they started looking more locally, and that gave our entrepreneurs in the ag sector an opportunity to start looking at how to market directly. Our state inspected meat processing plants and meat lockers, and there's about 90 of those across the state. They saw and are seeing a significant increase in demand. But during that whole time frame, our state inspectors worked 6 days a week to be available so that they could operate. And I was really proud of the work that they did. In fact, our records show that our smaller local meat processors increased their output by 23% starting in April. And it may be more than that because I haven't seen the numbers yet from September or from October, November, December. But the numbers and what's happening at those local plants has really been enhanced. So it did present challenges to many food and ag businesses in the direct-to-consumer marketing. Our division of ag marketing, especially through their work with the From the Land of Kansas trademark program, tried to provide assistance to these businesses and provide information on compliance for the new ones, some educational sessions, and helped try to find an outlet for those who typically market at the state fair, who obviously weren't able to do so in person this year. So in response to this demand for more local food purchases and accessibility, we, along with the Department of Commerce and the Recovery Office, utilized $12 million in the CARES Act. And on page 17 of your attachment is a one-page snapshot of that program. And you'll see that there were 257 grants awarded in Kansas. They went to individuals and businesses in 80 counties, about $11.5 million. And then there's the various categories that include the meat processing facilities. It included some direct-to-consumer farmers, producers, dairy, food, and meat processing, grocery stores. 26 of the local smaller grocery stores made use of some of these funds. 54 food, pantry, and soup kitchens, registered farmers markets, and there were some others. So you'll see on that page the distribution by county and even some of the categories where the funds were expended. But it did make a difference. Meat processing plants and lockers were able to add cold storage to extend the storage time and expand their capacity. There was a church in Kansas City area that used the funds to develop a community kitchen. Specialty crop farmers developed, in some cases, a new water system to expand their capability for specialty crops. A local grocery store in southeast Kansas used the funds to develop a system to offer online ordering and delivering food in the community. And then again, food banks and food pantries in several communities were able to use the fund to fill gaps to address the increased demand. So I'd just pause and say that we had at least 10 to 12 of our employees working as case managers with all of those 250 plus 57 grantees. And I think this is on top of what they normally would be working on in the late fall. So they did a tremendous job of working with those and still are with some of those who are yet to complete their project. So 2020 was not only a year of human health concerns, but ironically, we had considerable challenges on the animal health side. This year we had several outbreaks or incidences of a foreign animal disease called vesicular stomatitis virus. Started popping up this spring and summer. Our staff, along with some of the USDA veterinarians, did 270 investigations across the state. This disease was found on 102 premises in 26 counties. So we were very strained in that matter, but we also had to do some outreach and information with local fairs and horse shows, so they knew that the grasp of the disease, what it looked like, and how a quarantine may affect them. There were some other disease nationally. We didn't have some of these diseases that are listed here. We did deal with a chronic wasting disease herd that we worked with USDA to depopulate. So it was a pretty busy year on the animal health front. Number one, preparing to help depopulate pigs if needed, and secondly, handling all the other diseases that I just mentioned. The 5th annual Growth Summit did occur this year. It's usually in person, but we held it virtually, and we were able to break it out in various sectors. So we had 17 Zoom sessions by various sectors and categories of ag. Then we had 3 crossover sections and then a final session. And I've included in my comments on page 4 just kind of a sprinkling of some of the recommendations or observations that would probably be kind of real game changers for Kansas ag. Number one, we're trying to shift our focus to, on the dairy side, is dairy processing, not necessarily dairy farms and dairy producers, because if you build it, they will come. And our processor said we need an outlet, and we'll meet the demand if one comes to Kansas. The ag equipment manufacturing sector is still interested in forming a statewide organization. One of the other areas is that we believe there's lots of opportunities for youth or anybody in agriculture, and it may just be that they need to have an experience. And so we try to work with local FFA chapters and others to provide some immersion activities to introduce students to the opportunities. And I won't go through all of those, but I would say repeatedly what comes up is we don't want to lose focus on the need to enhance our broadband accessibility throughout Kansas, particularly those remote rural areas for access to technology and to growing business opportunities. So I mentioned it was a stressful year. We didn't realize when we helped put up a website called kansasagstress.org. We did that prior to the pandemic. It was launched in October of 2019. And probably the timing was well played, because in 2020 we had over 2,500 visits to that site with what they call unique visitors of over 1,800. Probably the point that sticks out to me is the average time that people spent on this website was 18 minutes. That's an average. There's a lot of quick on and off. So there are people that are out there that may go to a website, may look for them, or maybe somebody close to them. And so there was definitely a demand for that. Fortunately, the numbers show that so far in 2021, the traffic has dropped off. So I hope that's a sign that maybe the stress level is diminished somewhat. But it is an opportunity that our Deputy Secretary, Kelsey Olson, works with several partners on this website. It's not information we created. It's trying to pull it together from other sources. But we work with corn growers, Farmers Union, K-State Extension and Ag Mediation, KDHE, and even Iowa State University. And so if you have a chance to go to that site and you have recommendations or some concerns, let us know, because it's always in process of improving. And I might add that the last federal bill that passed supposedly has money for states to focus on ag stress. So we're still waiting for details, but there might be an opportunity to enhance this program with that funding. We just completed our second year in hemp through research program that was authorized by the Kansas Legislature. And we are now in commercial industrial hemp program starting the 2021 growing season. Our regulations, which we had to wait to get approval from USDA, but our regulations become effective on January 8th of this year. And we are in the process of taking applications and up through, I believe, the end of March. On pages 23 to 25 is a copy of the report that was filed with the legislature based on what was required by law, and we're glad to do. But if you have any questions about that, we'd be glad to pursue that discussion. So I would just say probably what's most important in Kansas agriculture is net farm income. And a year ago, and even as late as September of last fall, U.S. net farm income was projected to be significantly less than 2019. These are projections made by USDA. And at that time, it wasn't difficult to be very bearish about the economic plight of our farmers and ranchers because most of the commodity prices were weak. The pandemic stimulated decline in export opportunities, considerable disruptions in the food supply chain that I highlighted earlier. But you'll find on page 13, the bottom list of 4 charts, considerable swing in commodity prices, and there are considerable uptick in the last part of 2020. So that's been very helpful. But I would say that lost my place here. The latest projections that came out by USDA in December revised those considerably and said that 2020 would be much better, and particularly as much as $36 billion more net farm income than last year. And the report said that much of this increase is due to the federal assistance programs, coronavirus food assistance program. There's no doubt that changed the economic picture. And in Kansas, the website reports that there were 94,000 recipients in Kansas of that program, and it injected over $1 billion to the Kansas ag community. So if you couple that with the rebound in crop prices, it is easier to be more optimistic about what ended up happening in 2020 and what should happen in 2021. I want to emphasize, though, that these are U.S. averages, and it may not be as much of a positive in Kansas as it is nationwide, because in Kansas, our cattle and swine producers took a really big hit, as you'll see on those graphs. And in Kansas, our ag receipts, are over 50% of it come from the cattle side. So they probably fared much, not near as well as the crop farmers did across the United States. So that increase in net farm income probably won't be as high for Kansas and compared to other states. So looking ahead, it was 2020, of course, challenging for everybody, including those in ag. But I would say that we got to witness the strength and perseverance of our ag community and our rural community. And if you're in agriculture, you're always optimist. You're always planting the seed and planting the next calf crop. So we're hopeful that exports remain strong next year. Domestic consumer demand increases. If we can stay free of foreign animal diseases, and most importantly, if we can see a relief in the drought, particularly in the western fourth of the state, and it seems to be creeping to the east. So that's what we're watching and hopeful that will change here before we get into the growing season. That completes my prepared remarks. I went through it fairly quickly. I would add, too, Mr. Chairman, that we did provide some information in regards to our budget, and that starts on page 13 of the attachment. So if you want, I can pause to see if there's any questions about that I covered now, and before I touch briefly on the budget. It's up to you.
Just go ahead and move on to the budget.
Okay, it'll be, what page is that again? 3, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's on page 3. I think there's about a half a dozen pages. But it's an overview. Kellen worked very hard to put this together to kind of provide a snapshot. In this, it's incorporated the governor's budget recommendations in our adjusted 21 budget and FY22. So this includes 5% of all funds shrinkage for adjusted 21. It includes a 10% state general fund reduction for fiscal year 22, and then a 5% fund reduction for fiscal year 22, other than what is reduced for state general fund. And then historically, we receive about $10 million in state general fund, but due to the shrinkage and the reduction in FY22, we'll be down about to around $9 million, or about $1 million off. We do have a significant fleet of aging vehicles, but I think we can carefully, strategically maneuver through that. We do tend to have a pretty stable budget, as you'll see year over year. There are some situations where that's not the case, but a lot of that's driven by state water plan variations, and a lot of times there's a carryover from previous years, and this year is no exception because of the pandemic. It was difficult to get a lot of the contracts completed, but the demand's still there, and we'll still try to issue contracts and obligate those funds for what they're intended for. There's also a big uptick in the federal funding of $3 million, and that was mostly passed through from that coronavirus grant program I talked about. There was another $9 million that went through that program that was went through the Department of Commerce. We actually handled $3 million of that late in the year. And then sometimes federal pass-through funds will shift or vary from year to year. So on those pages, you can actually look at our various divisions or programs. You can look at the program expenditures, our source of funding, state general fund, water plan, EDIF, et cetera. And then you can look on page 4. We break out our various programs and divisions to show you what their budgets are for 21 and 22. So I will pause there to see what questions or comments that you might have.
All right, thank you, Secretary Beam. Obviously, as you mentioned in the opening comments of your testimony, that the agriculture business is the major industry in the state of Kansas, and being a farmer myself, I realize how important it is to our state's economy. The first thing I'd like to ask you is in regards to the farm income. And when my father and I are driving around and getting ready to feed our cattle, we listened to KFRM, and they had actually a report in regards to the farm income for 2020. And they had mentioned, I think you basically discussed this, that in regards to 2013, that was the highest farm income that we've ever seen. And then this year, in 2020, comes in second. However, the reason why that came in second is in regards to federal payments that farmers received, or in grants, or whatever the case may be in regards to COVID-19. So I just wanted to say, if you wanted to elaborate on that, because this was the highest farm income aside from 2013.
It's a good point. I probably didn't emphasize it enough in my remarks, but there's no doubt, had it not been for the federal programs and money that's made available, that it would be considerably dismal. So that was a big part of that. And those graphs show the cratering of the markets in the spring. So that was it's why those payments, I'm sure, were made, and Congress decided to put the money into to agriculture in that way, and of course USDA implemented it. So most people that I know would rather earn the money through the marketplace, but when you have a year like this unprecedented year beyond their control, it really was helpful. And it's not just going to help those in ag, but it's going to help those rural communities who depend upon the income that's received at the farm gate.
Well, and kind of going on to the farm income, I believe it was in 2019 when some of us did the mental health tour across the state of Kansas. And actually, we stopped in Hayes, and we visited with High Plains Mental Health. And they said that there was an influx of calls coming from ag producers and farmers, and the rate of suicide for farmers was increasing because for quite some time, the commodity prices had been low. I guess my question would be, what is the Department of Agriculture doing to address that particular issue in regards to the stark increase in suicides in regards to the farming industry?
Well, that was the drive behind working with these other partners to create the website. I know there's no limit to what you could and we'd like to do, but that's, I think, has been a helpful tool. And we've relied on a lot of people to help promote that locally. And if we get the funding from this next round, we're going to look at, number one, how we can improve that service, but number two, maybe how we can make it so more people are aware of it. But we're open to how we can enhance that need, because it's going to continue. Even if prices increase, as you all know, expenses have not decreased, so it's becomes more costly each year, and so there's probably going to continue to be a squeeze, especially for some, and we need to try to address that. We aren't mental health experts, but we know how to collaborate with those who are and try to tailor their services so that they understand why there may be a stress in agriculture and what the stress is. It usually leans considerably on multi-generation legacy. I mean, that responsibility and stress is very stressful.
I would say that that is true in regards to the legacy, as far as has been passed down from generation to generation, but also it's also on finances. And actually, I think, I checked with Chairman Kelly, but I have a bill that was being introduced in financial institutions to assist farmers in regards to lending practices across the state of Kansas and banking and financial institutions to help them out in regards to this crisis. The next question I have is, and this is moving on to cattle production. As I mentioned, I'm a cattle producer. So I'm just kind of wondering, in the state rankings, where does the state of Kansas rank in regards to cattle production across the United States?
It's usually third. We're right neck and neck with Nebraska, so it's Texas, Nebraska, and Kansas, really pretty close. It depends on, in beef cows, I believe we're about sixth, but in all cattle, cattle feeding, we'd be third, but all cattle and calves, it's third, but it's still a significant part of over half the cash receipts in ag in Kansas are from the beef cattle sector.
And I would guess that Texas is number one.
They are. There's a large landmass there.
And I would agree with that. Going on to the grants that you received from the CARES Act, and you said it was approximately $12 million, and I believe there's, 400,000 left over, or just shy of that. Is there any plans to extend to get that grant money out into the state of Kansas, since that's been extended since December 30th deadline?
Not that I'm aware of, and we're certainly not looking or working with other potential grantees. We considered it in December. We didn't know for sure how much there would be, and we didn't know the deadline. So we're kind of taking our cues from the Recovery Office as to how much money is available and what programs. So we're not pursuing any more at this point. We're trying to help those close out and finish their.
Yesterday, we had an update on all the federal dollars that have come into the state of Kansas in the relief packages. And actually, last night, the U.S. Senate passed the $1 trillion relief package, and now it goes to the House. Do you know exactly how much would be received in regards to agriculture out of that package?
I sure don't, because we're still trying to get our arms around what they did in December. But, and a lot of times they'll give general direction in dollars to USDA, and then it takes USDA a little while to design a program. But I'll be watching that. I hadn't even heard that it passed the Senate. So if
actually, the vice president had to break the tie.
I understand.
Last night. Kelsey, do you have a comment on that?
Well, I just wanted to add to that $400,000 that you referenced. I think those were agency funds that were provided through CRF that were for agency projects, not specifically for the Securing Local Foods grants. So I just wanted to clarify that.
All right, thank you for that clarification, Kelsey. And then actually last week when we had our State Finance Council meeting, we were going through, as you referenced, the relief package that was passed in December. And in regards to agriculture, there was a lot of unknowns exactly how much money was going to be received, and I didn't know. And I asked the question last week to Secretary Burns-Wallace. One, why is it unknown? And two, is that because you're going to have your producers filing an application with the farm service agencies, and that is the reason why the dollar amount is unknown?
Well, I think part of it is trying to understand what the direction that came with those funds. It's my understanding that the money for ag is for two purposes. One, for ag stress. Two, for the specialty crop block program. I probably butchered that. That's an existing program. The Department of Ag gets funding every year for that program. It goes out to specialty crop grants. We anticipate that we'll get more money than we've had in the past because of this legislation. So that program's in place. So it's ag stress and specialty crop block grant programs. That's our understanding. I don't know the dollar amount yet.
All right, thank you. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, thank you for being here. Appreciate you coming and talking to us. On page 3 of your presentation, you have the overview, which I love it that you guys do this. I wish every agency would put their a budget like this together for us to see. But the division where it says division and program, is that income? Is that that's not the expenditure side, right? Or is that, it is expenditure side?
It is expenditure by program.
Okay, all right. So on the second page, it's by division and not by okay. I just want to clarify that. Just a couple other questions. On the local foods, so were you seeing more from off the farm or more from local lockers?
I would say both, and I can get you a more specific breakdown on the numbers, but there was a significant increase in individual farmers and ranchers trying to expand and sell direct. And some of those were eligible and received some of these grant funds. If it had to do with meat and poultry, most of them had to then, and on page 17 we'll give you a little bit more of a breakout. But if it has to do with meat, you usually have to have somebody process it. And so that tended to drive the local meat processor to say, hey, I got all this business and opportunity, but I don't have the capacity to do it. And so, they may be wanting to do business to sell meat, but they may be wanting to do it for custom so that person can sell their own branded product. So it's kind of fun to see some of the entrepreneurs that have popped up and they were already in place trying to sell direct. This gave them an opportunity to really promote that and increase their sales, but it also stimulated families to look at adding this to their portfolio. And if this grows, it may provide an opportunity to bring someone back, within the family to the operation who may not have had a chance otherwise.
If I could interject real quick, I have a community, or actually two communities in my district, Lucas and Luray, Kansas, where in Lucas they lost their grocery store a few years ago. And right now there's a community effort to kind of set up a local producers, farmers market. I guess what programs are with the Department of Agriculture to assist communities in that situation to set up a local farmers market to sell products?
Well, I'm sure a division of marketing can help. I mean, you can actually have a registered farmers market through our agency, and I'm sure there are certain requirements and services that are available. So if they are, I would encourage them to reach out, and I can help make that connection to see. If nothing else, they know where something similar has happened in other communities and maybe can help connect them to folks who have been successful at it.
All right, thank you. Representative Hoffman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate that. That was one of the things I think this all brought out was how vulnerable we could be in our distribution of especially our meats, because so much of it is tied up in, just like you said, we do right here in Kansas, we do, what'd you say, a quarter of all the, was it the United States or all the world?
United States.
Quarter of the United States, just in, 4 or 5 plants
right.
in Kansas. So it really brought out the vulnerability. If several of them were hit with something, we'd be in big trouble. So yes. I hope that this kind of
That's why Homeland Security made a visit to Kansas.
I'm sure it is. Yeah. On the hemp production, what can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on? I can't remember what page that was on, but I guess there was, second to last page. It's kind of disappointing on how many acres were actually harvested compared to how many were anticipated. Do you think that's a trend that will hopefully turn, because it looks like it's getting worse?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason probably that the first 2 years were called research. There was a lot of lessons learned. And it's my understanding that a good deal of the acreage that wasn't harvested was drought out. And, we're going to have those. Folks have learned a lot about growing this crop. I think if the marketplace provided more incentives, we would see a lot more growth in this industry. We've proven, our folks have proven they can grow it. It's not always easy. There's certain challenges that you have. But I can tell you, I've been told that Montana and Oregon, I believe, the two states that the largest production of acreage, they were off by 50% this year. So it's not just in Kansas, it's a struggle everywhere.
Okay, thank you. And then just the last thing, and I mentioned this to you before we started, the price verification inspection process, do you have any more information on that for us? It was something we talked about in the Legislative Budget Committee.
Yes, that's, I'm sure the legislative post-audit report that came out November or December has stimulated more interest and concern about the program. It is a program within the Weights and Measures program at the Department of Ag. The staff and employees that we have that are spot checking large scales and grocery stores, large and small scales, also do the price verification. So one of the recommendations of the post-audit is to assess, are we strategically designing or determining where and when to do those, because we can't, there's no way anybody would be able to test them all every year. So what strategically provides the best coverage or helps the risk? And secondly, are we appropriately following up with those? And what would happen is we'd have so many investigations and found something out of kilter that we couldn't go back in a timely way and follow up. So we're working on that. Another point that was in the post-audit report is to assess if we had more resources, how would that help? So the first thing we're going to focus on is doing a better job with the employees that we have and be more strategic. And then later in the year, we'll look at, we could increase the number of inspections by this if we had more people, but we're not to that point yet.
Okay. When do you think that you...
Well, we actually met with the program director yesterday, so they're to come back, and we'll be working with them in the meantime, but they're to come back around mid-March with some strategies to address that, at least the first part.
There we go. We'll probably, want some sort of report or have you come back in March then and give us some more information on that. So appreciate that.
Be glad to.
Thank you, Mike, for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Beam, for your testimony today. One of the things I noticed in my committee, of all the hearings we've had, nothing stimulated more interest than the state fire marshal regulating hemp. It's something that seems to keep everybody interested. And I also want to thank you, CDC, our federal delegation. We have national beef in my district, and I think everybody did an exemplary job keeping people working, keeping the food chain moving forward, and I know you had a big part to do with that. I would at some point like a little more information on the lessons learned on the overproduction in the pork industry. I know you and I had a few conversations and dealt with some issues on that, just what lessons we learned, maybe what we think might work if we have this situation again. That's probably not a conversation we want to have here, but I would be interested in it. The last thing is, do you think these grain commodity price increases, is that a blip, something based on international currency exchanges? To me, it just seems backwards that our meat production is down, and yet many of the inputs to that, the prices went up. And I am just curious of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's my understanding, and there's probably people in this room that can respond better than I, but there was, I think, a surprising volume of exports that occurred late in the year and is occurring now, and I think China is really upped their purchase. We didn't have as large of 2020 fall crop that was anticipated, and I don't know why it wasn't, because that storm that went through Iowa put down as many acres in Iowa of corn that we plant in Kansas, and the market didn't seem to respond at that point. But I think a series of factors determine we don't have the volume that we thought we were going to have, and then our exports have increased.
So you think it could be something very much temporary in nature?
Yeah, it could be. I think it's going to depend on what 2021 harvest. And that's why I mentioned the drought. If we would have a 2012 drought, you know, it's going to be pretty scary what it could do. And so, and it also, what happens in other countries in their production, you know, they've ramped up their ability to produce a lot of the crops that we do. And so, you know, droughts in those countries versus our countries and trade, you know, so those are the two factors that I'm the most aware of. And then livestock is one of the main consumers of at least feed grains, corn and sorghum. So if their numbers stay steady or increase, and I think that the pork industry is probably poised to grow some, there'll be pretty strong demand for grain. There may be a loss in the fuel side if the ethanol industry can't be profitable. So there's a lot of variables, but I think drought, exports, and the pandemic. You know, how do we get through this? You know, is there some unknown that occurs with another wave of problems that'll weigh on everybody, the whole economy? And then foreign animal disease is a big wild card as well.
Thank you.
Do we know, because obviously winter wheat planting went on in September and October of last year, do we know how many total acres in winter wheat production we have?
I haven't seen those acreages yet. I'm not sure they've published them. It's amazing to me that we're still the #1 wheat state, and we're planting about half of what we did 10 years ago.
The acreage was down,
Yes.
From where we were and many years ago. So I was just kind of wondering if we had a total amount.
I've been looking for that. I'm curious.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine's just a basic question. I was intrigued by your new website, and I didn't get the name of it, so I want that was your Ag Stress?
Yes.
Okay, what was the name of that website again?
I always have to, it's KS, KansasAgStress.org. I'd be interested in your analysis of it.
Well, it's interesting, and, you know, even though I'm from Lawrence, Kansas, though, we do have a rural part of Douglas County, and they're not necessarily in my district, but I know those people, and they have some of the same concerns that you were talking about. And they mentioned they had visited a new website on Ag Stress. So they must have been talking about that. And you mentioned that the average was like 18 minutes. And this particular person said he and his wife spent a half hour, then they went back a half hour again. And it was through this website that they somewhat calmed down about it. And I didn't realize what they were talking about. So I'm going to find out was that the website. And you said now you don't have as much interest, so maybe it's tapered off a little bit for people. But their comment really was, if this is the website, that they were at the lowest because the money wasn't coming in and they weren't doing all this stuff. And they had a legacy because this is a 5th generation farm and they didn't know what to do. And so they just said, it was something to do with the legislature, and they wanted to thank me. Well, I had nothing to do with it, you know. But I'm gonna find out that's what it is, and maybe tell them to just send you something so that you get an idea of how people have used this.
Thank you. And, you know, if we have some more resources, if you or anybody else in this committee has thoughts on how we can enhance that, we would welcome that.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank
I could evangelize for the rest of our time, but I will try to do my best not to. But, of all the committees that we have, this is one that every one of the members participates in because we all eat. So I think, in our committee, in the Ag Committee, we have some new members that have great interest in a lot of things. And so a couple of things, though, what I get excited about is when I see the exports and China is at #1. And I say that because, China, honestly, like Representative Francis, China's in and out of the markets. So when they're out of the markets, typically prices drop. But we see it's so important to have Mexico and Canada as partners. And so, and thank you for your efforts and your team. I guess two things. One thing that I think we've learned is that we all need to do a better job of working with the feds to encourage more processing facilities, small, medium, whatever. Most of the facilities, at least in the western part of the state and really over the whole part of the state, maybe even the whole country, is that, to get that homegrown beef or pork, you're now looking at mid this year or even late this year. Many, in our area, which have abundance of deer, turn folks away from deer processing. And part of it is, they love the business, but they're also concerned. Most of the retail business has been shut off. So I think, it's not as simple as just saying, hey, we're here and get a quarter of beef out the side of the car. But really the challenge is working with the feds as far as to be able to do more intrastate selling, correct?
It is. It's really USDA who establishes how inspections to be done. And states can apply and get approval to have a state program. But if they do, it's got to be equal to. And there's an equal to and same as. You can go different routes. And so states who put a program in place to do equal to will get federal assistance. So half the money we have to run a meat and poultry inspection program comes from the state. I know there's a bill that I saw that just was introduced in Congress to potentially provide new avenue for interstate movement of sales of beef online, even if it's state inspected. So there seems to be more interest in Congress in maybe modifying that. In response to your first thing, I tell Kansans that Department of Ag probably touches the lives of everyone almost every day when you think about our weights and measures program with our fuel pumps, the grocery store with scales, and all the food safety licenses, which include restaurants and grocery stores and schools and cafeterias, food service, lodging. We have a lot of responsibilities that you'll see in those programs. So, but we all need to eat, and that's our main focus.
Thank you. I'll be very quick. I have several questions. I'm going to do one that what we're seeing on the national level, a movement now to focusing on the climate, carbon farming. What's going to be the role of, say, the Department of Agriculture here, or that partnership with the state and the Fed? Because it seems like, that train, that electric train, if you will, is leaving the station when it comes to farmers. The latest poll from Purdue came out just, yesterday, the day before, that said 7 to 9 farmers are highly interested, and that will probably progress once they see the dollar amount. So what kind of role would KDA play with the feds if and when that does move forward?
Well, it could be in several phases. The first role is, I think where we'll see the first change is the federal USDA conservation funds may have new programs for that purpose. And we're a member of the state technical committee, and so I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to have some input on how that's delivered in Kansas. Secondly, we have a division of conservation, and they primarily work with programs that are water related, water quality, but I know they're poised and to help provide, services to Kansas farmers and ranchers, funds become available and are more appropriate for the state. So there's a lot of look at, soil health. That's kind of a new trend. Now we have, carbon sequestration. And I like what I hear was soon-to-be Secretary of Vilsack is that, agriculture will be more of the solution than the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, any further questions for Secretary Beam? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate all of the information. Most of my questions are asked, but In the expense by division, the conservation division was one that had some increase over 2018, et cetera. I wondered what additional things we were doing, if it was timing or some other things that we'd accomplished in that area. So I was only looking at the summary on
Conservation.
page 3.
That would be, well, there was an uptick in 2019, I believe, and 24 funds for the water plan that were largely passed through. And then some of that was held over for 2021. So it's, yeah, it's primarily, if not all, carryover.
Okay, thank you. And what would be some of the things we'd be doing with the water plan funding as that happens?
Historically, we work closely with conservation districts. 6.
Okay.
And the conservation districts then roll out the programs, and we administer those. But page 6, that gives you the categories. So there's a little bit for irrigation technology, and that's kind of more on a research field trial basis. But the big programs there would be water resource cost share, non-point source, and there is conservation district aid monies that we pass through to conservation districts. And I can get you, and stream bank stabilization is one that we have a lot of demand for, and we weren't able to get, if any, I don't think we had any projects this last fiscal year because of the pandemic, because it requires, some engineering and design. So we can get you more specifically the practices that come in those categories if you like, but they're predominantly rolled out by the local conservation district.
Thank you. I'd be glad to weigh in on stream bank stabilization offline, but that is an important one to try and get done. If I may, I'd have a couple questions on hemp.
That's fine.
So, and thanks for that summary. It looks like our number of processors has decreased. Is that a trend that may be continuing? How does that end of the industry look?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think it's going to be reflective of the demand and marketplace for the various hemp products. One change that was noted, I think by Representative Francis, is starting this year, we will no longer license or regulate processors. And that was worked out in the previous legislature with, KBI, KDHE, several entities. They felt like somebody needed to monitor and kind of have some watch over the processing sector. We didn't feel like that was our expertise. So it's going to the state fire marshal, and we'll, I'm sure we'll be having conversations with them, but I don't see a big flourish in processors until we see, more demand for the products, and maybe less supply, or both.
So thank you. And you had mentioned what Representative Hoffman had asked about the acres harvested, because it was a big decrease you mentioned in Oregon and Montana as well. Our planted acres went up in 2020, which was encouraging, but the harvested really did fall off. Was it also a case of where we were focused, because we probably have a lot of acres of somebody that might be growing for fiber, and not a lot of acres, but a lot of value for somebody for CBD in a greenhouse? Do we know if there were differences across those types of product, or do we get that deep in our summary?
Yeah, I'm not sure we collected that, but I will check with our personnel that works that program. By the way, I've been encouraged, and we will try to have at least an advisory committee gathering at some point to assess, what's happened and what may be happening in the future. And I want to thank you and Representative Waymaster for your service on that committee. It's been very helpful. And then I also understand, I think K-State is coming out here this spring soon with their research report that might shed some light on this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to swing back to the Conservation Division, and you mentioned the conservation,
The conservation districts?
Yes.
I thought you might have a question about that.
I'm sorry. And then I forget what I'm going to say, don't I? Yeah, the conservation districts, you know, you talk about how important they are, but yet the Water Authority, you know, cut them again. So I'd like to see us, you know, put some of that money back in. And what would you say to that?
Well, it probably depends on where it come from, but I would just say with our interactions with the Water Authority, we discourage the reduction in that area, but I would say there's not, in their defense, there's not really a belief amongst the Water Authority that they need less money. There's a belief that it should come from another source in the water plan. And so that was the logic. I mean, I think they felt like Legislature ought to be putting more general fund money into it. But this may not be a good year to suggest that.
Right. And that kind of goes back to just another offhand. When I was the chair of Ag Budget, it was always frustrating to me that you had the Water Authority over here making all these recommendations, but yet you guys and KDHE, they're the ones that are actually having to implement these programs, and it seems like you have at times very little response of how that money or how that budget comes out because of what the Water Authority does.
Yeah, and I would say don't have a long history of working at it from the angle of the agency, but I would say this year there was at least 2 Water Authority Budget Committee meetings that dove into this deeper, and it was just a pretty good dialogue. We had lots of dialogue. Why we haven't spent more money in these programs? Well, we explained to them there's considerable demand. We just had to carry it over because we couldn't get the contracts this year, but they're still there. So we were able to provide information about where's the most demand for these various programs, and if there was a reallocation where we thought the priorities should be. So we had considerable input, but this year.
And you felt like did they move? I mean, did they change?
In some cases, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope we'll look at that more, and I'm sure that our chairman of the Ag Committee will.
We're before Chairman Corbett's committee tomorrow.
All right. Well, hopefully they will talk about that then. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any further questions for Secretary Beam? Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to take a second bite, since we don't have some time. Are you addressing food deserts in Kansas? A few years ago, I kind of laughed and said, that'll never be the case. But we're seeing in areas where I live, some of our small community grocery stores, as a group of us get together and invest in them, they can't survive. We lost ours here, kind of right as the pandemic was beginning. It's a real issue. We have, quite honestly, in our towns of 1,000 or less, we have, a store that seems to have an awful lot of yellow on it that's kind of becoming our source for food. And so is that something that you're addressing, or can we address, or is that something that we should become proactive as a legislature to try to work maybe with K-State and others?
Yeah, we haven't made it a priority of assessing community by community where the needs are, and perhaps we should. We've had, some unanticipated distractions this year, but there's other entities that make that a priority, and I think so far we would rather try to help respond and work with those entities if we can that are wanting to make that happen at the local level. But I would welcome, and maybe we should talk about how we can, as an agency, help. My experience is something like this, and most of these issues or projects, there's somebody that has involvement and a touch point in it. So I've always been a big believer that if we can properly communicate and collaborate, work with other people that have the same concern and are working on it, if you collaborate, you can have much more success. And so I think first help trying to identify those public and private entities that are trying to address that, and if we can help learn from that and help give it a boost, I'm all for that.
All right, any further questions for Secretary Bean? Well, I want to thank you again for being here, and I've always tried to have an update on agriculture in the state of Kansas, and I think I'll just say that I think the most poignant statement that you made today was that agriculture touches all the lives of Kansans. As Representative Rogers says, we all eat, and so we all have an aspect and know the importance of what agriculture means to the state of Kansas. And I think I can make this statement because I used to be a resident of Johnson County, and aside from those that reside in Johnson County, the true and primary economic driver for the state of Kansas is agriculture. So I would just like to thank you for being here today, and thank you for your comments.
Well, it was an honor. Thank you. And I'm available at any point if there's a follow-up that you want to make.
And we'll probably have you back in March as
Okay.
Representative Hoffman.
We'll start getting
A
ready.
follow-up. Okay, that sounds good. All right, committee, that basically concludes today's meeting. Tomorrow, we will be holding a hearing on House Bill 2195, which is holding reimbursing employers and other employees harmless for fraudulent unemployment insurance claims. And then we'll be having our first budget report outs and recommendations from the General Government Budget Committee. So Chairman Sutton will be giving us the recommendations from the Insurance Department, Real Estate Appraisal Board, Real Estate Commission, Department of Revenue, and the Kansas Dental Board. So till tomorrow at 9 a.m., we're adjourned.